The cold architect of ruthless power, whose name combined manipulation and deception with determination, was Niccolò Machiavelli. To dismiss him as merely cynical is to ignore the brutal honesty of his reflections. Centuries later, Machiavelli and his work remain subjects of study in political schools, business circles, and even in understandings of life itself. The prince was a mirror that reflected power as it truly operates, behind closed doors, in palaces, in councils of war, and in the minds of those in power. As history progressed, those who followed Machiavelli's principles, whether consciously or instinctively, not only survived, but dominated. Those who ignored them, clinging to idealism in a world dominated by ambition and fear, often met ruin and were consumed by the void of forgetfulness that accompanies the passage of time. These stories will demonstrate that cruelty is a byproduct of understanding the rules of the game. Below are 7 historic moments where Machiavelli got it right, 7 principles of power, deception and control that proved true with blood and consequences. It is much safer to be feared than loved if one of the two must be lacking. In the 15th century, Eastern Europe, the Christian kingdoms of the West, and the growing power of the Ottoman Empire in the East painted a completely blood-red border. Wallachia, a small principality nestled between present-day Romania and Bulgaria, was in their sights. Short on resources and fragmented by internal noble factions, its survival depended on the calculated moves of those in charge, and above all, on maintaining a steely temper against the two empires that fought over that principality with all their pride. Vlad II, who was the ruler of Wallachia at the time, would hand his son Vlad III over to the Ottomans during the most important years of his formation, where the boy would grow up living amidst military discipline, court politics, and the use of fear as a method of control. Silently, he would learn, receive feedback, and adapt. By the time Vlad III returned to claim the throne of Wallachia, he found a country plagued by corruption, disloyal boyars, and external threats, as well as his murdered father. The answer pulled the trigger in his mind, because where he was raised, he knew that the only solution to that nest of lies and corruption was not with compromise, but with terror. Vlad III became Vlad Tepes, and Vlad Tepes would eventually become better known to the world as Vlad the Impaler, since impalement was one of the practices that characterized his violent methods for dealing with conflicts. With perfect cunning that allowed him to fight for control of his homeland, Vlad knew how to navigate between the two great empires that considered Wallachia their next military conquest. And he knew how to position himself as a great political ally of both with a single goal, to ascend to the throne and make a statement that neither the Ottomans nor Wallachia's enemies would forget. After retaking the throne usurped by the conspirators who assassinated his father, he decided to take charge of those responsible with one of his most famous actions. The purge of the Wallachian nobility, those traitors who had sold out Vlad's father in favor of political impositions that favored them. Vlad invited hundreds of boyars to a banquet, questioned their loyalty face to face, and as punishment, hundreds of nobles were forced to work rebuilding castles devastated by the war they had caused, literally working themselves to death. They worked until their corpses were impaled and displayed to the public as a reminder. Treason would no longer be tolerated, and power now belonged to one man. After purging Wallachia of the corruption of its nobles, he then proceeded to purge it of its indiscipline, of the terrible insecurity and depravity that ruled its people. How? By murdering every thief he found, every accused rapist, every depraved person he saw. The Knights of Wallachia went from being a canvas on which only chaos was painted to one on which order and security were painted, but with blood. Vlad knew that fear was a feeling that prevents the world from acting, that simmers in people's thoughts and in many cases warns them and prohibits them from doing things their subconscious deems dangerous. He who instills fear about something can control it. The nobles already feared him, the people already feared him. His enemies began to fear him when the borders and even the trade routes were filled with impaled men. Who? They could be anyone from Wallachian robbers to Vlad's public enemies. Anyone, even allies, would be aware that the Impaler ruled Wallachia. With these actions, Vlad consolidated his position, proving the prince right once again. When they love you, people will do things for you out of desire. But when they fear you, people will do things for you to survive. And survival will triumph over desire every time they come face to face. A prince must learn how not to be good, and to use this knowledge or not use it according to necessity. Catherine arrived in Russia as a minor German princess, a foreigner married to a member of the Romanov dynasty. She spoke little Russian, had no direct claim to the throne, and found herself politically isolated in a rigid and xenophobic court. Yet within 2 decades, she would become the longest reigning ruler in Russian history, an autocrat who expanded the empire, modernized its institutions, and reshaped its identity. Her rise began with betrayal. Her husband, Peter III, was unpopular, erratic, pro-Russian and politically incompetent. Catherine cultivated alliances between the military and the nobility, patiently positioning herself as the most Russian option despite her foreign origins. In 1762, she staged a coup, deposed her husband, and a few days later, he died. Officially, it was an illness. In reality, it was likely an assassination, orchestrated by Catherine's allies. This is where Machiavelli's advice finds its perfect channel. Catherine understood that moral boundaries could not be universally applied in the realm of power politics. To secure the throne, she acted decisively and unethically. But she never displayed these acts openly. Instead, she imbued her government with Enlightenment ideals, corresponding with Voltaire and Diderot, funding art and science, and presenting herself as a philosopher queen. She appeared merciful, cultured, and progressive, while behind the scenes she suppressed revolts, such as the Pugachev Rebellion, expanded serfdom, and crushed dissent with an iron fist. When it suited her, she championed liberalism. When it didn't, she shelved it. The nakaz, her famous legal code, was a manifesto of Enlightenment values, but it was never fully implemented. It served its purpose, projecting virtue without risking control. Catherine demonstrated a precise understanding of political necessity. She falsified loyalty to her husband to seize power, authorized the elimination of rivals, and employed calculated repression to maintain control, most notably during the Pugachev Rebellion. However, she always balanced these acts with displays of refinement and intellectual commitment, corresponding with Enlightenment thinkers, commissioning major architectural projects and promoting education. Her political pragmatism was veiled by a carefully crafted image of enlightened government. Power demands the ability to act outside of virtue when the moment calls for it. Machiavelli urged rulers to learn this art as an instinct for survival. Catherine the Great mastered this lesson perfectly. She was charming, wise, and seemingly noble, never hesitating to cross the moral line when power was at stake. In her, Machiavelli would find proof of his principle, as well as a mastery of her own. In the actions of all men, and especially of princes, one judges by the result. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor, engineered the unification of Germany through manipulation, deception and war. A master of statecraft, Bismarck understood better than any of his contemporaries that morality was secondary to the outcome, that success, once achieved, rewrote the moral ledger of the past. Appointed Prime Minister of Prussia in 1862, Otto von Bismarck wasted no time in outlining his vision for German unification. In his famous Blood and Iron speech, he emphasized that decisive action and military strength, rather than speeches and parliamentary resolutions, would shape the future of Germany. True to his word, Bismarck wielded war as a calculated instrument of policy. In 1864, he allied with Austria to provoke and defeat Denmark, gaining control of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. 2 years later, he turned on Austria itself, engineering a diplomatic crisis that led to the Austro-Prussian War. Prussia's swift victory at Königgrätz shattered Austrian influence in German affairs, and led to the creation of the North German Confederation under Prussian dominance. In 1870, Bismarck manipulated tensions with France by editing the EM's dispatch to make it seem as though King Wilhelm I had insulted the French ambassador. The resulting Franco-Prussian War rallied the southern German states to Prussia's side. After a decisive victory over Napoleon III at Sedan, the German Empire was proclaimed in 1871 in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, fulfilling Bismarck's plan for a unified Germany under Prussian leadership. These were not spontaneous wars of defense or acts of desperation, but meticulously orchestrated campaigns rooted in realpolitik, a ruthless, pragmatic approach to power where manipulation, diplomacy and strategic warfare served long-term national objectives. Deception, isolation of enemies, and calculated aggression were all tools Bismarck employed with surgical precision to achieve his ultimate goal, the creation of a unified German empire dominated by Prussia. But Bismarck's ambitions did not end with unification. After 1871, he recast himself as the guardian of European stability. Recognizing that further wars could endanger what he had built, he focused on maintaining peace through a complex system of treaties and diplomatic balancing. He negotiated the League of the Three Emperors, the dual alliance with Austria-Hungary, and the Reinsurance Treaty with Russia, all designed to isolate France and prevent a two-front war. Domestically, Bismarck launched the Kulturkampf against the Catholic Church and later introduced anti-socialist laws, not out of doctrinal conviction, but to neutralize perceived threats to the empire's unity and order. His policies were consistently guided not by ideology or morality, but by a cold, clear calculus of national interest. For Bismarck, stability and strength were the ends. The means were negotiable. Machiavelli warned that rulers should be judged not by their intentions, but by their results. Bismarck embodied this principle precisely. His methods, dishonest, manipulative, and at times aggressive, would fail any ethical test. But they achieved what centuries of German princes could not: a unified nation. A prince must lay his foundations on what is his own, not on what belongs to others. Wu Zetian rose from a low-ranking concubine to the sole ruler of the Chinese Empire during the Tang dynasty, an unprecedented achievement in a patriarchal Confucian society. Her rise was neither peaceful nor accidental. It was the result of calculated ambition, political manipulation, and decisive action against anyone who stood in her way. Initially a concubine of Emperor Taizong, Wu Zhao entered the palace at a young age, receiving the rank of Chiron, one of the lower positions in the imperial harem. Upon Taizong's death in 649, she was sent to a Buddhist nunnery, in accordance with palace custom, where the former emperor's concubines were expected to live out the rest of their lives in seclusion. However, Wu defied this fate. She had already formed a close relationship with Taizong's son and successor, Emperor Gaozong, by seducing him, and within a year of his accession, she returned to court, not as a widow, but as his consort. Her return to court was unprecedented and controversial, but Wu maneuvered with care and precision. She quickly gained Emperor Gaozong's favor and began positioning herself against Empress Wang and consort Xiao, both of whom held noble lineage and considerable influence. Through strategic alliances with palace eunuchs and the careful use of court intrigue, Wu accused her rivals of grave crimes, including witchcraft and the murder of her own infant daughter, a death some historians believe may have been orchestrated to manufacture scandal. These accusations led to the arrest, public disgrace, and eventual execution of both women. With her rivals eliminated, Wu was named Empress Consort in 655, securing her position as the emperor's primary wife. From that point forward, she exercised growing control over state affairs, effectively co-ruling with Gaozong and later governing in his name as his health declined. As Gaozong's condition worsened, Wu Zetian's authority expanded. She issued edicts in his name, appointed loyal officials, and reshaped the inner court into a network of allies and informants. Upon the emperor's death in 683, she did not relinquish power. Instead, she acted swiftly to sideline her own sons, nominal emperors in name only, ruling as empress, dowager and regent. Any suggestion of disobedience or disloyalty was met with exile, forced suicide or execution. She established a secret police force to monitor the court and eliminate dissent, tightening her grip with a bureaucracy loyal not to the dynasty but to her alone. In 690, she took the unprecedented step of declaring herself emperor in her own right, founding the short-lived but symbolically powerful Zhou dynasty. Her coronation as emperor, not empress, broke a foundational taboo in Chinese political culture. She justified her rule through Buddhist doctrine, commissioning texts and artworks that portrayed her as a divinely appointed sovereign. At the same time, she promoted officials based on merit rather than lineage, expanded the examination system, and encouraged agriculture and public works. Wu's rule was marked by contradictions: harsh repression alongside administrative reform, personal ambition coupled with state efficiency. But beneath every political decision was a consistent Machiavellian logic. Power must be seized, threats must be removed, and legitimacy must be shaped through narrative, not inheritance. Zetian understood that power in name was meaningless without actual control. She seized authority in a rigid political system that had no place for her and maintained it through the strategic elimination of threats and absolute control of the state apparatus. One must not only win over enemies but also destroy them, or else live in constant fear. After Lenin's death in 1924, Joseph Stalin began a calculated consolidation of power within the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. As General Secretary, a role initially seen as administrative, he gained influence by controlling party appointments, placing loyalists in key positions across the bureaucracy and regional leadership. This allowed him to build a disciplined and loyal base that answered to him directly. While other Politburo members engaged in ideological disputes and theoretical debates, Stalin concentrated on the structure of power itself, identifying and eliminating anything that stood between him and undisputed authority. His first major rival was Leon Trotsky, a central figure in the Bolshevik Revolution and founder of the Red Army. Stalin worked systematically to remove him from power, first stripping him of his positions, then expelling him from the Communist Party, and finally forcing him into exile by 1929. In 1940, under Stalin's orders, Trotsky was assassinated in Mexico by a Soviet agent, eliminating him permanently as a political or symbolic threat. Stalin then turned against other senior Bolsheviks. Grigory Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev and Nikolai Bukharin, each of whom had played leading roles in the early Soviet government, were arrested, tried in highly publicized show trials, and executed. Between 1936 and 1938, Stalin launched the Great Purge, targeting not only political rivals, but also military officers, government officials, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens. The NKVD, the Soviet secret police, carried out mass arrests, torture, and executions under the justification of rooting out enemies of the people. By the end of the decade, nearly all of Stalin's former comrades and potential rivals had been eliminated. He had reshaped the Communist Party and the state into instruments of personal control. Political loyalty was enforced through fear and surveillance, and even minor dissent carried the risk of imprisonment or death. Stalin's hold on power was absolute. By the late 1930s, Stalin had removed nearly all opposition within the Communist Party and the broader Soviet system. Through purges, forced confessions, and extrajudicial executions, he consolidated power with methodical precision. Loyalty was secured through appointments and enforced through fear. Institutions functioned not as checks, but as extensions of his will. What began as a bureaucratic advantage, the role of General Secretary, became the foundation for total control. His approach did not rely on charisma or public appeal, but on eliminating uncertainty and ensuring that no alternative centers of power could emerge. In practice, it proved more durable than revolutionary idealism. A prudent man must always follow the paths beaten by great men and imitate those who have been supreme, so that even if he does not equal them, he may at least resemble them. Themistocles was born around 524 BCE to a modest family in Athens. His father was likely a citizen, but his mother may have been a foreigner, which made his social standing uncertain in aristocratic Athenian circles. He began his political rise in the years following the reforms of Cleisthenes as Athens transitioned into a more democratic system. Themistocles aligned himself with the common people, gaining influence by speaking directly to their concerns and championing naval expansion, a policy that would benefit the lower classes who rode the triremes. He was elected archon, a chief magistrate, in 493 BCE, marking his formal entry into high-level Athenian politics. During this early period, Themistocles strongly advocated for the fortification of the Piraeus, the port of Athens. Unlike the older inland port of Phaleron, Piraeus offered a deeper harbour and better defensive potential. His push to make it the city's primary naval base reflected his long-term vision. Athens would need a navy to protect itself and to project power across the Aegean. These early initiatives, naval development, port fortification and populist politics, laid the foundation for everything that followed. Long before the Persian threat became urgent, Themistocles was already reshaping Athens into a maritime power, anticipating a future others had not yet begun to imagine. When Xerxes launched his full-scale invasion in 480 BCE, the Athenians were forced to evacuate their city. Many regarded this retreat as a humiliation. Themistocles saw it as a strategy. He convinced the Greek allies to make their stand not on land, but at sea, at Salamis, where numbers would count for less and maneuverability would count for everything. To draw the Persians into the trap, Themistocles sent them a message under the guise of betrayal, suggesting that the Greek alliance was fracturing and that a swift attack would finish the war. Xerxes took the bait. In the narrow straits, the massive Persian fleet was forced into disarray. The lighter, more agile Athenian triremes struck with precision. Themistocles had not only predicted the type of war Athens would face, but had shaped the means to win it years in advance. The victory at Salamis turned the tide of the invasion. Athens would be burned, but not defeated. Themistocles had preserved the city's power and its future, not through strength alone, but through deception, foresight, and preparation. In a time of crisis, Themistocles read the threat, shaped public opinion, manipulated his enemies, and delivered a lasting victory. His legacy is not of ideals fulfilled, but of survival secured. In that, he acted exactly as a ruler must when facing ruin, not waiting for permission to act, but creating the conditions under which victory became possible. In taking a state, the usurper ought to examine closely all those injuries which it is necessary for him to inflict, and to do them all at one stroke, so as not to have to repeat them daily. Lucius Cornelius Sulla rose to prominence through military skill and ruthless ambition during the late Roman Republic. Facing political rivals and civil unrest, he marched on Rome twice, unprecedented acts that shattered the Republic's norms. His first march forced concessions. The second established him as dictator without term limits. Sulla used his power to eliminate enemies through proscriptions, publicly listing those condemned to death and confiscating their property. This campaign of terror secured loyalty and reshaped the Senate with his supporters, weakening popular assemblies and tribunes to consolidate aristocratic control. After accomplishing his reforms, Sulla surprised Rome by voluntarily resigning and retiring. No friend ever served me, and no enemy ever wronged me, whom I have not repaid in full. Born into an old but poor patrician family, Sulla learned early that power wasn't inherited, it was taken. His charm could disarm, his cruelty could terrify, and his patience could suffocate his enemies. He began as a nobody, poor, overlooked, but attached himself to Marius during the Jugothine War, helping secure the king's capture. That alliance, however, was only a temporary convenience. Sulla already saw Marius for what he was, an upstart novus homo whose hunger for glory left him vulnerable to being outmaneuvered. The feud with Marius was born out of ambition. Marius, already a war hero after the Cimbrian War, sought sole credit and absolute influence. But Sulla, younger and colder in his methods, began stealing the spotlight. The breaking point came with the First Mithridatic War, 88 BCE. The Senate appointed Sulla to lead the campaign, but Marius, through political manipulation and populist allies, had the decision overturned in his favor. For most men, this would have been humiliating. For Sulla, it was cause for war. Instead of accepting it, Sulla marched on Rome, the first Roman general to turn his army against the city itself. This act shattered centuries of unspoken law, proving that the armed force could dictate politics. Marius fled, but when Sulla left for the east, Marius returned with his own army, drowning Rome in blood before dying shortly after. When Sulla came back victorious from the east, he didn't just take revenge, he institutionalized it. His prescriptions were political assassinations disguised as legal decrees, lists of men to be killed, their wealth seized, their families ruined. It was a message to Rome: oppose me and your name will be erased. Julius Caesar at the time was a promising young noble, and inconveniently, Marius's nephew by marriage. To Sulla, bloodlines weren't sentiment, they were liabilities or assets. When he seized power, Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia, Marius's daughter. Caesar refused. That defiance almost cost him his life. Sulla stripped him of his priesthood, confiscated his dowry, and sent men to kill him. Caesar fled Rome, hiding in the countryside, surviving only because influential friends interceded. It's here that Sulla reportedly said the words that cut across history. In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses. A recognition. Sulla saw in Caesar the same dangerous ambition and political instinct that had made Marius his greatest rival. Sulla eventually retired out of confidence that he had reshaped the Republic to his liking. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you all for watching. If there's a historical figure you'd like to see featured next, or if you have any thoughts to share, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll see you in the next video.